this is just a brief overview. First, before we get into the theosophical literature and interpretations of light, I want us to actually go through what light means to us here in the phenomenal, because we interact with light all the time. Light's within us, it's around us, and it's with us 24/7, whether we're awake or asleep. And yet we don't really ask ourselves what it is that we're perceiving, or that's what's living, what's vibrating. And I think it's just because it's around us all the time that we take it for granted. So I want to kind of go through ways in which we interpret light here in the phenomenal. What does the term mean to us? How do we express our feelings through light? And then we'll go on to more esoteric concepts. And throughout this little presentation, I'm also going to be giving you little tidbits of information about light that maybe you know, maybe you don't know. One of the things about light is color. And color, if you look at it in an additive way, if you were to take additive and subtractive color and just kind of look at how color combines. If you look at pigment or paint and you were to combine all of the 7 colors into one, you would end up with a very dark paint. But if you took light or light filters and kind of laid them over onto each other, they would blend into kind of like a white light with a very slight violet tinge to them. And it's just an interesting archetype that is prevalent. So I just thought that every so often I'm going to bring in some information about light and color. And it's not anything for you to take seriously at the moment, but just stick it in the back burner of your mind, and it might be useful later. So let's think about some of the terms, the light term itself. How do we use it in language? In typical language, when we use it either poetically or just, colloquially or whatever, we use it to illustrate something. And a few of the things that we are trying to convey is truth, clarity, and perspective. So let's look at some of these terms. When we say, see the light, what does that mean? Or throw light on a subject, light the way, in light of, read by the light of, by the clear light of day, let the light shine in. What are these concepts revealing to us? Well, in one way, it tells us that light is internal with us. It means truth. It means clarity. It means that there's a path in front of us. And so we use this term, I think, because it is actually kind of a reflection of how we relate to light. It's almost an internal thing. Also, spotlight, to give focus to, or lighthouse, to provide a safe passage or sure passage. It is also the representation of inspiration. So if you see those cartoons with the light bulb ahead on the top of the head, you know that there's an idea coming. Light is also the muse of poets and dreamers. If you're looking at this screen, I know some of you are calling in, but we have various poems here from some key poets known throughout history. And if you can find a poem that you really like, I'd like you to read it and then explain to us what the term light means in that context. But I want to take Langston Hughes' for myself. This is my favorite. He writes, in the mist of the moon, I saw you, and you were lovelier than the moon. You were darkness. I love this phrase here because without darkness, we would see nothing. I love it because it tells me that darkness is almost like the real teacher in life. Without that darkness, we cannot compare anything If we were to live in light and see nothing but light, we would never even know what light was until that darkness came on the scene. So I have to say, I love his poem for that reason, or his saying. Would anybody else like to take a shot at this? Just unmute yourself. Anybody? Come on.
I'll do Emily Dickinson.
Oh, good.
The poet lights the light and fades away, but the light goes on and on. Wow.
Beautiful. What does that mean to you, Shobha?
I think of probably some form of enlightenment, some form of knowledge.
It's beautiful. Anyone else?
I was struck by the Maya Angelou one.
Go for it.
Nothing can dim the light which shines from within. It seems like that light is just so intrinsic.
Yeah. Anyone else? Let's at least do one more. Well, I would have to say my next very favorite is Ralph Waldo Emerson. It is one light which beams out of 1,000 stars. It is one soul which animates all men. And that's pretty theosophical.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay. Light is also used as art. Light requires darkness to really shine. On the left side, and I'm sorry for those who can't see who are calling in, but on the left side of the screen is this beautiful light display that is made with a long exposure to moving light. It almost looks like a jellyfish lit up in the ocean. And I can't explain it any other way, but it's just extremely beautiful. And then there's a still light fixture. It's hanging on a wall. And it's just flowers coming up out of the ground. And the flowers are lit. And it's beautiful. But what makes it beautiful is that there's darkness surrounding it. You can really feel the impact of the light when there is extreme contrast. And if you don't believe that, try to imagine watching fireworks in the daytime. That's all I have to say. There are many religious practices that use candles. While there are approximately 4,300 religions in the world today, nearly all of them use candles for various reasons, including prayer, commemorations, incantations, meditation, and to bring focus to a higher source. We know that in Christianity, candles signify connection with Christ, often used in conjunction with prayer. And also many Orthodox Christians celebrate the resurrection of Jesus during Easter with holy fire. And there's a photograph on the right side that shows people coming together, all with candles lit. And it's kind of like a sharing of many candles to one flame. Judaism uses to commemorate the miracle whereby 1 day's worth of anointed olive oil lasted for 8 days, symbolized by the 9-branched Hanukkah. There's also the 7-branched menorah. Buddhism uses candles to represent a state of impermanence and change. And Taoism, candles are set on altars in pairs to represent yin yang, or sun and moon, and the harmony between light and dark. In Islam, during Al-Fitr, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, Al-Fitr, they use candles to honor the closeness to God and celebrate after the Ramadan fasting. And there's other celebrations that celebrate light in the East. let me see if I can just reduce my, okay. We have Diwali in India, the Lantern Festival in China, the Qingji Lantern Festival in Taiwan, and in Oban, Japan. They light the Buddhist, this is a Buddhist event for the people to pay tribute to their ancestors. People hang lanterns in front of their homes to guide the spirits of their ancestors and to perform Obon dances. At the end of Obon, the lanterns are placed onto bodies of water to guide the spirits away. The Lantern Festival in Beijing is one of the largest. It takes place in Thailand, and actually in Taiwan, and it's actually in a town right outside of Taipei. And it's considered one of the largest and one of the oldest. It's been around for about 1,000 years. There's a whole story behind why they send those lanterns up. Won't be getting into that right now, but there are lantern festivals all over the East. There's one in China celebrated on the 15th day of the lunar year, which falls anywhere between the late February and March. It's of Hindu origin. And the festival was adapted by Buddhists in Thailand to honor the Buddha. And in Diwali, this festival usually lasts 5 days and is celebrated during the Hindu lunar solar month. And that's between mid-October and mid-November. One of the most popular festivals of Hinduism. It symbolizes the spiritual victory of light over darkness. We have celebrations in the West as well, and wherein light takes on a major role. Christmas, or the pagan Yule, is a celebration of the solstice and the return of the sun. And Kwanzaa we talked about one of the oldest celebrations for light. Kwanzaa is one of our newest ones. It's a 7-candle celebration representing unity, self-determination, collective work and responsibility, cooperative economics, purpose, creativity, and earth. Those are the focal points of the 7 candles that are represented. And this is one of the newest ones. It started shortly after the Watts riots in LA. And it was a communal effort to celebrate African traditions, culture, and self-reliance. Halloween, or Hallows Eve, or Samhain, is Celtic. And it's derived from Celtic tradition to basically ward off the mischievous spirits that were known to walk in the astral during this particular time of the year. So they would make these carvings out of these root vegetables. And it's not the only reason they did that. It was also a seasonal celebration. I'm going to talk about the Hanukkah. This is the 9-branched, basically the 9 candles that represent, commemorates the reinstatement of the Second Temple after the retreat of the Greek armies from Jerusalem in 164 BC. And this celebration lasted for 8 days, symbolizing the miracle that occurred when one day's supply of anointed oil lasted 8 days. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about this archetype. I think it's an archetype here where you have the 9 flames coming together, one lighting the others. But we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Light was a common theme in reference to the pineal gland, or the third eye. The 17th century French scientist and philosopher René Descartes believed it was a chief interpreter of vision and the seat of the human soul. He goes on, he believed that light particles interacted with the eyes And the image seen here, the light particles themselves, were then transmitted to the pineal gland being the nexus between the mind and the body. He writes, in man, soul, and body touch each other only at a single point, the pineal gland in the head. But Rene Descartes was not the originator of this idea by far, because ancient Egypt knew of this pineal gland long before he did. So I want to give them special recognition. They referred to it as the third eye, or mystical or spiritual eye of Horus, as seen here in this hieroglyphic here. And so we just want to say that, Rene, sorry, you were not the originator. In near-death experiences, there is also a light that's been reported multiple times. In fact, Jeffrey Long, MD, writes in his article, Near-Death Experiences, Evidence for Their Reality. He writes that there are certain characteristics that keep coming through all these near-death experiences, or NDEs. And some of these characteristics include perception of seeing and hearing apart from the physical body, passing into or through a tunnel, encountering a mystical light, intense and generally positive emotions, and a review of part or all of their prior life experiences. And I just wanted to kind of look at this where he says positive emotions. I don't know how to interpret that, because I don't know that there are necessarily emotions that we relate to here necessarily on this phenomenal plane, because it almost feels like there is a love so great in that light that those passing even near it are drawn toward it. Well, light is a main topic, if not the topic. It is actually used to understand all aspects of science, or just about all aspects of science. I have a bunch of words here on the right-hand side that are associated with light, motion, and their force. But light is used, like I said, in almost every scientific field these days to determine speed, density, proportion, chemical makeup of objects, not just within our Earth, but in our atmosphere and in space. If we look at this, and I'm sorry for those who can't see, on the left hand of the screen, we have a picture that is taken of the Earth that shows photosynthesis taking place. And we know photosynthesis to be organic matter using sunlight in order to synthesize nutrients, those nutrients being primarily carbon and oxygen, which we know are the primary ingredients for life here on Earth as we know it. And beneath that picture, we have the same oval shape, but this was not our entire universe, but as far much of the universe as we can possibly have gotten, using what was called the WMAP, which is the Wilkinson's microwave anisotropy probe. And what this probe does, or did, was collect over about, I think, a 7-year period, all of the microwave transmissions. And those microwave transmissions were able to transmit, different densities and temperatures. And it was through this particular WMAP that science was able to identify something in space that they could not ever explain. And that thing is dark matter and dark energy. And this little blurb here was taken from one of NASA's websites. It says, more is unknown than is known. We know how much dark energy there is because we know how it affects the universe's expansion. Other than that, it is a complete mystery, but it is important mystery. It turns out that roughly 68% of the universe is dark energy. Dark matter makes up about 27%. The rest, everything on Earth, everything ever observed with all of our instruments, all normal matter, adds up to less than 5% of the universe. We think about that for a minute. Just kind of marinate in that thought. Only 5%. It's almost analogous to looking at the tip of an iceberg, where 90% of the iceberg is hidden beneath the dark waters. Something to think about. And this is a transition. I'm going to use this as kind of a transition into our theosophical discussion. And here's where I'm going to ask other people to kind of step in and read. Could I have somebody read for me, please?
Sure, I can read.
Thank you.
The essence of darkness being absolute light. Darkness is taken as the appropriate, allegorical representation of the condition of the universe during pralaya, or the term of absolute rest or non-being, as it appears to our finite minds. From Volume 1, Secret Doctrine, page 69. The absolute, okay, well, let someone else, okay.
Yeah.
Absolute, the universe in pralaya, or to pre-cosmic principles before the manifestation of the cosmos. According to the tenets of Eastern occultism, darkness is the one true actuality, the basis and root of light, without which the latter could never manifest itself, nor even exist. Light is matter, and darkness pure spirit. Darkness, in its radical metaphysical basis, is subjective and absolute light, while the latter, in all its seeming effulgence and glory, is merely a mass of shadows, as it can never be eternal and is simply an illusion, or Maya. Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, page 71.
Thank you so much. What's interesting about darkness, though, we use these terms, but what do we really mean when we use the term darkness? I remember having a conversation way back, I was probably in my early 20s, and having a conversation with a gentleman who was completely against any kind of consciousness after death. So I asked him, well, what do you think after death, the after death state is? And he replied, well, it's just black. And I said, well, how do you know if there's nothing perceiving it? So much of what we understand about these degrees of light is really based upon what's perceiving it. So when we get into a state of complete absorption, there's no longer what we would term an objective ability to perceive something. Perhaps it's apperception, but I think it's even beyond apperception. So we call it darkness because I don't think we know what to call it. And maybe that's a good thing, but she does refer to this as darkness. So it's something to contemplate. What does that really mean? Can someone else read this, or at least a section of this next page? Because it talks more about darkness and
Sure, I can. The SD, Volume 1, page 545. There is a difference between manifested and unmanifested matter, between pradhana, the beginningless and endless cause, and prakriti, or the manifested effect. Says the sloka, that which is the unevolved cause is emphatically called by the most eminent sages pradhana, original base, which is subtle prakriti, that is, that which is eternal, and which at once is and is not a mere process. That which in modern phraseology is respectively referred to as spirit and matter is one in eternity as the perpetual cause, and it is neither spirit nor matter, but it, rendered in Sanskrit, tad, that, all that is, was, or will be, all that the imagination of man is capable of conceiving. Even the exoteric pantheism of Hinduism renders it as no monotheistic philosophy ever did, for in superb phraseology, its cosmogony begins with the well-known words, there was neither day nor night, neither heaven nor earth, neither darkness nor light, and there was not aught else apprehensible by the senses or by the mental faculties. There was then one Brahma, essentially Prakriti, nature, and spirit. For the two aspects of Vishnu, which are other than his supreme essential aspect, are Prakriti and spirit, and Brahman. When these two other aspects of his no longer subsist, but are dissolved, then that aspect whence form and the rest, that is creation, proceed anew, is denominated time, O twice born. It is that which is dissolved, or the illusionary dual aspect of that, the essence of which is eternally one, that we call eternal matter or substance. See in part 2, primordial substance and divine thought. Formless, sexless, inconceivable, even to our sixth sense or mind, in which therefore we refuse to see that which monotheists call a personal, anthropomorphic God.
Thank you so much, Vicki. That was a long one. I appreciate it.
It's a fascinating, reading it out loud, reminds one of the flow that HPB is giving us. And it's just that one section alone. If we never read anything else, would be amazing.
Which section? The whole thing, or the section?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, as opposed to the anthropomorphic God, what we're so fortunate to be able to do with her words and this kind of Eastern view is to really expand the mind beyond the personal. And so we start to look at archetypes and patterns, because we can't know that. We cannot ever know that absolute. But we can start to understand its process. We can say, okay, there's an initial duality, a rest and a time of rest and a time of activity. We can begin to say that there's a mother and a father, or these two originating sort of like opposites, but what you have is an outward force, which we call male, and then another force that constricts it and guides it and informs it that we call Mula Prakriti, or mother. But those two are just aspects. But within those two aspects and their synthesis, we find a pattern through which light can start to become reflected. First, its first reflection, its secondary reflection, a tertiary reflection. And that's kind of what we'll be looking at here in a little bit. Would someone like to read this one? Ready?
I'll read this one.
Thanks, Judy.
Stanza 1:5. Darkness alone filled the boundless all. For Father, Mother, and Son were once more one, and the Son had not awakened yet for the new wheel and his pilgrimage thereon. Darkness is Father, Mother, light their Son. Says an old Eastern proverb, light is inconceivable except as coming from some source, which is the cause of it. And as in the instance of primordial light, that source is called darkness by us. From an intellectual point of view, as to...
I think you've skipped a line, but because that source is unknown.
I'm sorry if I'm reading badly, I'll stop.
That's okay, take your time.
That source is unknown, though as strongly demanded by reason and logic. Therefore, it is called darkness by us. From an intellectual point of view, as to a borrowed or secondary light, whatever its source, it can be but temporary myopic character. Darkness then is the eternal matrix in which sources of light appear and disappear. The web of light, Mula Prakriti or Akasha.
Okay, so I wrote that in there. So it's a way, and thanks so much, Judy. That's just a way of looking at that web of light, that web. Think about that, a web as being that Mula Prakriti. There has to be some form through which that light can start to manifest. And they give for definition for primordial light is the divine light, which is born in and through the preternatural darkness of chaos, which contains the all in the all, the seven rays that become later the seven principles in nature. And here again, it says, Father, Mother. This is part of the 10th sloka in the same stanza. Father, Mother, spin a web whose upper end is fastened to spirit, the light of the one darkness, and the lower one to its shadowy end, matter. And this web is the universe spun out of the two substances made in one, which is Svabhavat. Oh, I'm sorry, this is stanza 3. My apologies there. Thanks, Judy. So as we were talking, that in order for light to reflect itself, it has to be contained. If you have a source of motion out there in a void, it's not going to be able to develop any heat. Whatever heat it develops, it's just going to flow out into space and not do anything, if it can flow at all. So what has to happen is there has to be some kind of a container that can begin to bring that motion together into heat until that heat reaches a point where it reaches the edge of that container so it can reflect itself. And thermodynamics explains how thermal energy is converted to or from other forms of energy and how matter is affected by this process. Thermal energy is the energy that comes from heat. This heat is generated by the movement of tiny particles. So here we have movement within an object. The faster these particles move, the more heat is generated. And in the stanzas, stanza 1 primarily, it says mind was not, where there were no ahi. There was not a pleroma, there was not a system, there was not a container there, or Dhyani, and it goes on to explain what an ahi is. There was nothing to contain it. That's really, really special because energy needs to have a direction for one thing. So under law, there's an archetype, there's like a circuitry. You can think about it. Think about Mula Prakriti as being a motherboard on a computer, just as an analogy. It has a dual binary aspect to it. When you turn it on, the energy gets to flow. When you turn it off, it stops, it's at rest. But when you turn it on, there's a whole archetype through which that energy moves. There's a system, and that system we call universal law. And so here on this page, this is kind of relative to stanza 2. Sloka 3, the hour had not yet struck. The ray had not yet flashed into the germ. And she goes on to explain it in her comment. Would someone like to read her comment, please?
I will.
Thank you.
The ray of the ever darkness becomes, as it is emitted, a ray of effulgent light or life, and flashes into the germ. The point in the mundane egg, represented by matter in its abstract sense. But the term point must not be understood as applying to any particular point in space, for a germ exists in the center of every atom. And these collectively form the germ, or rather, as no atom can be made visible to our physical eye, the collectivity of these, if the term can be applied to something which is boundless and infinite, forms the noumenon of eternal and indestructible matter. You can't
this is actually something I wrote here. So if you see anything in yellow, I wrote it, just so they don't get confused. But thanks so much, Marlon. I just wanted to mention that my father's was a theosophist all of his life. His mother actually was a theosophist, but my dad used to come up with all of these remarks to help explain this archetype. And he used to always tell me, you can't force 1 trillion megawatts of energy into a 5-watt bulb. There has to be a system, an archetype or law of structure and movement in place to disaggregate, disperse, reduce, and reamplify the energy or light into its countless hosts. And I wrote here, in addition to that, you might want to think of it in terms of how we generate energy here in this phenomenal world. We could take a generator that's taking a massive amount of energy and using a form of triangulation. We do the same thing, don't we? To move that energy out so that everybody can have a little bit of it. And every time it has to get reduced. It might go on to from a big generator to a smaller group of generators that then send it out to even smaller apparatuses that can then deal with that amount of energy. And it's all happening through a triangulated process. If you look on the left, on the right side, here's some diagrams that kind of explain, I believe, how light comes in from its rest, which is the gray circle up on top. I'm trying to explain it for those who are not, who can't visually see this. There's a gray circle up on top, which is kind of representative of that absoluteness state, pralaya or rest. And then we have our primordial substance, and we're just demonstrating it with a circle that's white this time, which is our Mula Prakriti or Akasa. And as I said, that germ actually gets flashed through this Mula Prakriti. We call that the first logos, but it's not manifested, but it's slightly the first differentiation that occurs. After that, the symbol of the line going across the circle represents pre-cosmic matter, Mother Nature. And then the third is the vertical line going down, spirit coming in connection with it. So it's interesting to note that during the where we have this crux here, where the vertical line thereby meets the lateral line, something is happening here. Well, that's considered the third logos, but I want to talk about what that might mean. Is this where the first lighting of Manas occurs? And the reason I'm going to ask that is because it's still within the circle. So we call that still a pantheistic consciousness, meaning it's not separated. It's still very synthesized. But I'm just, we'll probably want to talk about that a little bit later. I'm sure there's all sorts of thoughts on that subject. But let's, at some point, would like to discuss what that means, where the vertical line and the horizontal line meet. And the square here at the bottom actually represents manifestation. This is objective form, objective consciousness at this point. All the while, you're taking synthesized energy. And just like with the energy we were talking about earlier, you're breaking it up, consolidating into separate points, bringing them back together in a smaller amount, separating them again. And it's almost like a breath in of itself, a collapse and expansion, which again is another archetype. And this follows in the same light as the Zohar. I'm choosing the Zohar in this particular presentation because the Zohar means brilliance. It means emanations. It talks about emanations. That's kind of what we're talking about. And they're basically saying the same thing. There's a statement taken from, on the Zohar, taken from the Kabbalah Center. They say, on the first day, God said, let there be light. Yet the bearers of light, the sun, the moon, and the stars, were not made until the fourth day. Kabbalists believe that the light created on the first day of creation was not light as we know it. It was consciousness. According to the Zohar, this light was everywhere. A vessel was needed to hold this light, to receive it and share it. And so God hid the light within nature and within us. And this is pretty much along the same lines as we're taught, that Blavatsky teaches. In the Zohar itself, it says, to conceal the blinding light of the upper world. And by the way, I think the upper world, they have two different main spheres that they call the supernal Garden of Eden, and then the lower Garden of Eden. I'll continue reading. To conceal the blinding light of the upper world and thus create a tiny point into which our universe would be born, 10 curtains were fabricated. These 10 curtains are called 10 Sephirah. Each successive Sephirah further reduces the emanation of light, gradually dimming the brilliance to a level almost devoid of light, our physical world known as Malchut. The only remnant of light remaining in this darkened universe is a pilot light, which sustains our existence. This light is the life force that gives birth to stars, sustains suns, and sets everything from swirling galaxies to busy anthills in motion. Moreover, the 10 Sephirot act like a prism, refracting the light into many colors, giving rise to the diversity of life and matter in our world. This is just a page that talks about the 7 principles that, where she writes in the teachings of Theosophy, HPB, and the masters describe the human being as consisting of 7 principles, divided into a higher triad and a lower quaternary. And of course, we talked a little bit about the supernal Garden of Eden and the lower Garden of Eden. These 7 principles or 7 parts of our nature are the divine part, the spiritual part, the intellectual part, the passional part, the vital part, the astral part, and the physical part. The first 3 of these comprise the higher triad, and they last forever, while the lower 4 last just for one lifetime and are new in each lifetime that we have. And I don't want to have to read all of these. However, if anybody wants to, share or if you want to have access to the whole presentation, I think Jonathan may be able to share the link to that. Would someone like to read this for us, please?
Sure, I will. Yes. Absolute abstract ceaseless motion. Occultism sums up the one existence thus. Deity is an arcane, living, or moving fire. And the eternal witnesses to this unseen presence are light, heat, moisture, This trinity including and being the cause of every phenomenon in nature. Intracosmic motion is eternal and ceaseless. Cosmic motion, the visible or that which is subject to perception, is finite and periodical. As an eternal abstraction, it is the ever-present. As a manifestation, it is finite, both in the coming direction and the opposite, the two being the alpha and omega of successive reconstructions. I didn't mean to go past that sentence there, where every phenomenon in nature, there's an asterisk, and this is the key difference between motion that is measurable by time, distance, and dimension versus intracosmic motion or duration that is immeasurable and constant. And then where there is motion, there is law. Where there is law, there is motion, and both are ceaseless.
Thank you, Monica. And, you know, when we think about the law, you know, she states, at least one of the phrases that I've always heard from my father is the statement of the absolute manifests a portion of itself, yet remains separate. Have you heard that, you guys?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, in the Bhagavad Gita.
Yes. But when you think about it, though, or when I think about it, that same archetype perhaps is getting replayed over and over again. Could we say, since we say the absolute manifests a portion of itself yet remains separate, is that what Atma is doing? Atma radiates a portion of itself yet remains separate, yes. As in Buddha. Buddhi does the same thing, manifests a portion of itself in Aimanas, but remains separate. Aimanas manifests a portion of itself, on and on. Judy, I love the cat on your lap. I have one of those too.
This is Pandora.
Yeah.
Pandora the Persian, yes.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And so,
she thinks so.
So we see that law is constantly in operation, even at that state. And I have to wonder, you have motion and you have law. And I guess they are one as well. And they're both ceaseless. It's just an interesting concept. And I just wanted to relay that possible archetype that everything is extending a portion of itself yet remaining separate. Because how would you maintain that central anchor? It's almost like a umbilical cord.
But
Desiree?
Yeah.
I can't help but mention, you know, the visual that you gave us a while back of the blackness and then like a nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the nervous system in the brain, and it's all interactive with the darkness as well. Yeah. And then you gave us the percentages of how much of the universe is dark and how much is light and so on. I believe it correlates to what you're talking about right now.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder, because it's all the same pattern getting laid over and over and over again. I mean, the pattern of it in and of itself is kind of simple, but because there's so many cycles and so many representations, it becomes complicated. But the actual archetype itself, I don't think it's complicated at all. You know, I agree with you there.
Right.
Yeah.
Are you, when you say the absolute manifests a portion of itself and yet remains separate, are you citing something from the secret doctrine or just making a philosophical point?
Oh, no. One of the first things I ever learned in Theosophy as a teenager, when we would do our fundamental principles, that was one of their statements.
Because philosophically, I don't think that's true. What I mean by that is Krishna says that in the Gita, for sure. And we understand the transcendent and the immanent, but the absolute as a philosophical concept is beyond any kind of manifestation.
Well, but it's not manifesting. Something else is. I agree with you, because I have all kinds of issues with regard to our treatment of the absolute, which I don't think should be treated at all. When oftentimes when we're reviewing stanzas, and we're doing a lot of stanza reading right now in our Sunday class, we think we're talking about the absolute, and I can assure you we're talking about Svabhavat almost entirely, because it talks about expansion and 7 ropes, and you're giving all these characteristics to something that's beyond description. So I get your philosophical point of view, and I tend to agree with it too. There's, I think there's some play where, and I think there might be some play in terms of kind of blurring Svabhavat in with the absolute. But hey,
yeah,
because it's in an absoluteness state. That's why I put absoluteness. That's Svabhavat. It's asleep. It's at rest. So in a way, it's in a stasis. But there's always motion in the background. There has to be, because if there wasn't, philosophically speaking, we'd never come out of a pralaya. So if you think of a jack-in-the-box, you're winding up that da 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 da.
Yeah,
at the very end, that energy has to get expressed.
Well, Pierre just mentioned about Parabrahm, but that's because you can use Parabrahm in different. You can use it and attribute it to anything, but and someone can say that. You can even use the word absolute in a relative sense, but there has to be a sense in which the manifest and the unmanifest and the unmanifestable are still less than that, which is tad in Hindu philosophy, which is that. So there's a sense in which the HPP says this very clearly to me, that you have to have some idea, which is beyond an idea, of something which is completely beyond any system and any form of manifestation. Even when you speak of the unmanifest as being something that doesn't ever really manifest, that's still not the absolute. I'm just trying to clarify, there has to be, I'm trying to say that there's, however much we might be flexible in terms and use terms in a very creative, flexible, fluid, plastic way, as one understands it, you still have to say that there's something that's ultimately beyond transcendence and immanence, unmanifest and manifest. That's all. That's the only point I'm trying to make.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you, because there should not, you can't have something relative to something else and be absolute.
Yeah, exactly.
And I agree with your logic 100%. And it's something that, which is why I make the distinction between Svabhavat and the absolute. There's a black background, and Svabhavat is at rest somewhere there. But I mean, these are all states of consciousness, for one thing. It's very difficult to talk about states of consciousness, because in that synthesized state, there is no, what we would term as consciousness.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's at rest.
I agree. Just like the problem.
How much, is going to, you have more?
Yeah, a couple more.
Yeah.
And it gets more.
Just because we're running out of time. I admit.
I'm sorry.
I started the meeting late, so it's not your fault.
Okay, here we go. So in the book of John, stanza 4, sloka 1 says, "Listen, ye sons of the earth," and I'm sorry I misspelled the, "to your instructors, the sons of the fire, learn there is neither first nor last, for all is one number and issued from no number. And here we have the 1. And for those that can't see, there's a circle with a line, a vertical line going through. And that represents, symbolically, the 1 from the no number. And I wanted to start with that because our next page is going to get complicated. So if we turn to page 37 of The Secret Doctrine, volume 2, we're going to see a circle with numbers on the side of it, starting with 5 and 6 at the top, 4, followed by 4 and 7, followed by 3 and 8, and at the very bottom, the pair are 2 and 9. And that circle represents the Sephiroth, the various multiplicative chambers that this energy flows through. So what I've done in this particular slide is I took that circle with the numbers around it, which is just our number line from 2 to 9, made it a straight line so that it's a straight number line. And then I paired up the numbers using brackets. And when I did that, I thought, wow, this thing kind of looks like a menorah or Hanukkah, the 9-branched Hanukkah candle. So then I just couldn't figure out what that middle, the middle candle was, because it should be number 1. So then I took the degrees between the numbers, between the pairs. There's only 1 degree between 5 and 6. So that's at the top is 1. There's 3 degrees between 4 and 7. There's 5 degrees between 3 and 8, and there's 2 degrees between 7 and 9, or 2 and 9. And those I wrote down into the center of this circle. And this to me represents the Sephiroth, the movement of energy through these various centers. And we could call these centers, as well as 3, 5, and 7 being prime, we could call them, I don't know, I like to call them intersections. But this is representative, I think, possibly of the Hanukkah, or the Hanukkah is actually representative of this Sephiroth. And we can have more discussions about this maybe at another time or in another presentation or discussion. But it all stems from this 1 from no number. So when we get down into, if we notice that the 5, which is representative of Manas actually, in the middle of this circle, could be where that candle or that particular principle is getting lit. It's still subjective, it's still within its pantheistic state. But when you get down to number 7, you're actually getting outside of that pantheism, which could be represented by this sign over here, which is your circle with the cross outside of it. And that is also the sign of Venus, which relates to Manas. And over here, we have the Tetractys, the Pythagorean Tetractys, which gives you your 4 levels, your 1 on the top, your 2 on the 2nd floor, your 3 on the 3rd floor, and your 4 on the 4th. So if we follow it down, we know that the first one is informing the 2nd layer. So 1 plus 2 is 3. You can't have 2 by themselves, because the minute you have 2, you have 3, because you always have your point of origination. And am I confusing you guys right now?
No, go.
Out there? You want me to keep going?
Yes.
Keep going.
Okay. All right. So 2 plus 3, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so we have our 4 layers here, our 4 layers of Tetractys right here. And so when we think of the full man, we're getting, or the full mind thinking, objective thinking man, we're really getting down into this 0.7 here, this diamond that has the 7 in the middle of it. And this is kind of a representation of well, it should be the representation of the Sephiroth, because that's what they call it on page 37, volume 2 of SD. It's just using a circular form to define it and using number rather than name to define it. There's more to it, but I'm not going to get into it right here. But if you guys want to discuss it later, I can stay. I don't want to do it right now. Okay.
Can I just ask one little question?
Oh yeah.
Are we to understand that the 10 Sephiroth are the 10 planes of existence, which also includes man's consciousness, obviously?
Yeah.
So 3 somehow.
So here up on the top, you have your, what probably would be, they call it the crown or Kether. But when we were talking about the mother, father,
right?
This is kind of the same thing. Where you have your mother, father, and then you have the synthesis of them both. But it's from that synthesis that the other 2 come into existence. Because by nature they're one.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean you lose your point of origination. You always maintain your point of origination. If you look at the Sephiroth, you see that line going all the way down to a certain point. But it has to stay within, that pantheistic circle. But that's like an umbilical cord. It goes all the way down. So when we talk about something manifests a portion of itself yet remains separate, that's what I'm talking about. There's always something that maintains that umbilical cord. But that soul has to be able to that light has to be able to get dispersed and reconsolidated and dispersed again. That's just the simple pattern in nature. When you think about it, this kind of gives me chills when I think about the trouble nature goes through to get synthesized thought into objective thought. Think about that. Nature's doing it. Why? Why is it so important that process take place? It's just it's an interesting phenomenon that I just, and there's a pattern to it, absolute pattern to it.
And isn't the undoing of the process, the evolutionary cycles that go back up?
Yeah, I think it's just when I think about it just in terms of movement, because the movement is ceaseless, it's a breath. If we think about how we breathe, what happens when we breathe? We're taking relatively ambient air, right? And we're focusing it into an instrument, and that instrument has a certain process also of triangulation, of getting it through to our system and feeding it. So, and then we exhale. It's that same process. That's why I think we can take that pattern and pretty much, superimpose it onto anything that moves in nature.
Yes.
And it will still, it keeps its structure the whole time. And here's another thing going on to the next slide, Monica.
Mm-hmm.
When we look at computers, they're also utilizing the 1 from no number. And this is why I think this whole archetype is within us already. It's already, within our own DNA, or numinal DNA, yes, so to speak. Because computers operate off of the same language, a binary language of 1 and 0. And then from there, a language is developed. And from there, that energy, that language is taken to all these cellular networks where they have base stations, and then that information is triangulated out to smaller stations where it's retriangulated out to even smaller stations that finally reach your home. And what happens when it reaches your home? You get to see a reflection of the world. And it's almost like, oh, so this is what nature's doing. And we have it, that archetype within us.
Yes, a system of replication.
Yep. And final thought on this is from Master KH. Please read, Monica, since we have you up.
The greater darkness into which the perfected Siddha is finally merged thereby is that absolute darkness, which is absolute light.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's my presentation.
Thank you, Desiree.
So good.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And if anybody wants to stay a little later and wants to go over that circle with the numbers, and it's just, you know, I know we have a lot of people here that are on phones, and I don't want to be discourteous to them.
Could I say something that I think is real helpful?
Yeah.
That is that the black holes, you know, the center of every galaxy is a black hole. And there is an event horizon, which is the light. And the black hole, we know very little, if anything, about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that pattern that you're talking about, an archetypal paradigm, if you will, between light and dark is very important. And so the Greeks would say that Dionysus, darkness, and Apollo are twin brothers. And there's that consciousness looking at itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so beautiful. You know, every time that I read about this archetype, and I spend a little bit of time on it, I just think about that whole process and how much energy it must take, and just the law to get that synthesized consciousness totally asleep, get it woken up and into a place where it can actually objectify. You know, that is built in. It's amazing. It's like ultimate intelligence.
Yeah. Isn't it fascinating that the secret doctrine has a whole level of manifestation in the darkness, which it suggests most people are unaware of.
Yeah.
And then most societies pick up where the light is. But the secret doctrine, as you have exhibited today, has this manifesting process in the darkness. It's very interesting. Thank you so much, Desiree.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, I hope I didn't cheat anybody by spending so much time on darkness when it's about light, but I think you have to start there. Yeah.
You can't know one without the other. So lovely presentation. I loved it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have some raised hands here, and we might go with that protocol if it's okay. And let me see if I got this correct. Looks like Judy's next.
Yes, thank you for a great presentation. The most abstract. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the most abstract ideal I've ever been able to conceive of is in the first fundamental, the secret doctrine, the eternal, omnipresent, immutable, boundless principle. And I just think of it as an absolute darkness. As far as I know, everyone does. And yet, if I didn't think of it, there wouldn't be any light in my brain. And I know there is. There is the expression in the John, the Logos in the book of John, I am the light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And some translations, it says the darkness has not comprehended it. There's a different interpretation of the Greek. And so in a sense, I guess we can say that the darkness really is the great light because of consciousness, which is the reason for the universe, if we can say there's any reason for it. It's consciousness that always was, has been and is, and will be.
I don't think you can say necessarily there's a something reasoning it, but I do know, I won't even say believe, I know that there's a compulsion and an impulsion, that they're just like a heart beats. There's a compulsion to know. There is a compulsion to know. And there's an impulsion of love, not in a conventional way that we think of to know, like curiosity, and not in a conventional way like we think of love, because this is far out. I mean, it's just, it's almost like a compulsion, like you have a compulsion to breathe in. That, but on a cosmic scale, you can think about it that way. And sometimes we use analogies to try to demonstrate that. And just like the Jack in the Box, where the spring reaches a point where it can't take anymore and it has to release energy, right? But there is definitely something that compels this universe to know.
Can you take a question from Iluka?
Oh yeah, hi Iluka.
Hi, Desiree, lovely presentation. I can see that you put a lot of hard work, a lot of research. Coming to light, but within us and our physical form, we know that the enlightening of manners, that was an enlightening to our consciousness at the beginning of the first, what is it? We were here for 18 million, and on the 30 millions of our being here is when the enlightening of manner took place. And we know the story of the Kumaras, right? But I'm also thinking that, is it, when you look at somebody's eyes, and we know that they shine, that's the light of the soul, right? And they say that, somebody mentioned, they also said to me that somebody told them, look at your face every morning and just look at your face. And I say, oh, maybe because that's how you can check out your light in your eyes. And there is in fact people who have no light, hardly any light in their eyes. I have seen one time, I saw a person that was very scary. So as you know, the light is connected with our soul. Yeah. Now I'm wondering, I actually have an experience with somebody who was brain dead, and the doctor opened the eyes and it was opaque. It was like, there's no light there anymore. Oh. You're saying, oh my goodness. Because you see in movies when people die, or we have the eyes open and there's a lot of lights, that light goes away as soon as the brain dies, and of course the soul follows. And it's find that.
Yeah, it's like looking at a statue almost.
And I thought that was pretty amazing. So we have light, we see the lights every day in our eyes, and then in the future, when we get awakened, then we have the third eye, which is another type of light. I was wondering if you have something to say about that.
The pineal gland?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I could speak to that a little bit. Probably other people in this group could add to it. So I like to think of the pineal gland as maybe a conduit through which a different kind of light comes through. So it's not the type of light that we see, ambiently around us. It's an internal light. And it may not even be that much different from the light, or maybe an essence of, or part of the light that folks see when they have near-death experiences. But if you remember, or I don't know if anyone here has had a real, what they call a dream where the colors are really, really bright. And it almost seems like that's more real than this phenomenal existence. You know, I've had a couple of dreams like that where you feel like that is the reality. This isn't. And I think a lot of that comes through possibly. Now, I haven't done a lot of study on the pineal gland per se, but I do know that in certain states of meditation, people will experience a flooding of energy at the crown of the head. Almost feels like you stuck your finger in a light socket. And along with that flood, they'll oftentimes see a very bright light. It's like in the inside of the head. It's not like out here. It's flooding the inside of the head. So my guess is that pineal gland is functioning in that sense. But in any case, as a conduit. And I'd like to look into that just a little bit more to see what the pineal gland is communicating, not just to our central nervous system, but also in terms of the heart, because there may be a very special connection there between that gland and the intelligence of our own heart. Yeah. Who else got their hand up? Any other? Beautiful. And by the way, I'm not the only one answering questions. So if you have a question, let's bring it, have it for everyone to comment or answer, please.
Yeah, we can keep the meeting going. Some have to leave, but that's fine. Okay. For anyone who would like to stay. And
yeah, I mean, if anybody wants to stay and go over that other slide with me that has all the numbers on it, they're welcome to, or we can save it for another day, or it doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, thank you. I have to leave, but I really appreciate the light of your presentation.
Thank you.
Light of the Logos. Yes. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you so much, Desiree. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Just wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Does anybody want to stay a few more minutes? And while we still have Desiree, that was pretty incredible exposition. I thought what you did with the 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7, and the menorah, and the Sephiroth, and the Tetractys, and how
and it states, Jonathan, and the I don't know if it's relative or not, related or not, but you know, when you're reading the stanzas and it says of the Bohat that it makes its rounds through 3, 5, and 7, just the fact that they're prime numbers is important.
And this universal pattern that replicates at so many different levels, and how and they're all a re-embodiment. Well, not that's the wrong word. A re-usage of the idea of I created this whole universe with a single portion of myself, yet remain separate. The immanence and the transcendence. And not just that it's random, but you showed how it's a function of law, and that law is everywhere. I thought that was incredible.
Yeah.
Even at these abstract levels, it's the same operation of law, which makes you think that there's something about law that is so everywhere and nowhere. That's so universal.
Exactly. I mean, it reminds us just how intelligent this universe is.
Yes, thank you.
It's absolute intelligence.
Yeah, and how you showed how that is the function, that is the operation of intelligence. About a container, consolidation, and then the release at a lower level, et cetera. Monica?
Yes, I just remembering some of what you were saying about darkness, and also what you're saying about where there is motion, there is law. And it reminded me of that idea that in spite of Manvantara activity and pralaya, in pralaya, there's no complete stillness, if I understand it correctly.
We would never come out of pralaya if there was.
Yes, that there's a pulse that's there. So whether active or passive, the law is always operating no matter what. So I just wanted to be sure I understood that, saying it out loud.
It's always an operation. And when you think about it, this manifesting a part of itself periodically, periodically means their law is active.
And there you go. And also the thing in general of darkness, that, you know, in the world, we think of darkness in a different way than in theosophy, obviously. But in the sense that darkness is actually light.
Yes.
But it's not, certainly not thought of that way in the world.
Yeah.
A light that is beyond our comprehension.
But I think a lot of that is just based in ignorance and selfishness, a lot of the dogmatizing these very arcane abstractions. You know, you're taking these beautiful concepts and basically making them into a little Ken doll. And that's sad. I mean, it really is. And so we have darkness, which is, in my estimation, after doing this study, is the great teacher. It's the great, I know this is, I think it's the great mother. And it makes me think and have respect for even the darkness around me, because I can't be enlightened until I have that darkness, you know? I need to be able to see darkness in order to be able to relate to the light, let alone understand it, you know? It's just we've taken such negative view of darkness, and this for the same reason we've created, for the same reason we've given Lucifer this horrible personality or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about even the term Satan, you have S-A-T. What does S-A-T mean? Sat.
Well, we know, yes.
And A-N, the agent of. And yet we turned it into something, you know, beyond evil. When you look at these words, Deva, did that become devil? You know,
as I don't know. Progresses, I would think that this is the wrong interpretation of these words become more prevalent. It's almost, it too has to have its own cycle, I would think. But again, it's the world's interpretation versus the theosophical truth. And a lot of people think, or rather do not realize, that light is a physical thing. That one's, it's still tough for me.
Yep.
So.
Still physical, still measurable. Yep.
Any other questions while we still have Desiree?
Or anybody else, because I don't have all the answers.
I want to just chime in here. Are you aware of Steiner's anthroposophy?
A little bit, yeah.
So he talks about like a trifold or triune, I don't know what to call it, but he talks about God, he talks about Ahriman, and he talks about Lucifer as three different agents. And I thought that was really interesting because it coincides with the Hinduism pantheon of the Trimurti, right? The Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma. Mm-hmm. And I was like mulling this over for a while, and well, not so long, but Brahma would be Lucifer, right? Because it's the bringer of the light, Lucifer, and it creates everything and manifestation. And as we know that in the secret doctrine, it was said something about the Parabrahm, and right, that in the beginning we have that. I can't remember the exact words, but it made me think of that too. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't, I'm just thinking as you're talking, actually, and I'm wondering if Lucifer wasn't meant to actually be some form of Mula Prakriti. Mm-hmm. Because you have to have Mula Prakriti in order to be able to reflect light. And like so many other feminine symbols have been degraded into evil symbols. So, you know, the logic just keeps going. I don't know. I just happened to be thinking about, just as you were speaking about it, that, you know, it could be that these are actually signs of Mula Prakriti, but maybe not. I don't know. Lucifer and even Satan.
Well, I wonder if Satan was Ahriman. I mean, I don't know, right? Because Ahriman, as I understand it, is the epitome of darkness. But I don't see Shiva as that. You know, I see Shiva as consciousness.
I have to read it.
So it's interesting. Yeah.
And Ahriman is from Zoroastrianism?
I'm not really sure where he got it. I just thought that it coincided with the Hindu Trimurti, you know?
Oh, okay.
I see Shiva as light. I mean, I don't know. I see Shiva
as consciousness.
As consciousness and the light or the highest portion of Saturn. I don't know. Maybe not.
You know, the term Satan or Saturn, it comes from Saturn. And Saturn by the Jewish people, and Jehovah was also Saturn.
Jehovah, yes.
They fear that planet, because whenever that planet was, you know, whenever that planet was active, a lot of things happened that were not good for them, you know, earthquake and different punishment. So they took that as a punishment. So they, like I say, they fear that planet.
I wonder if it had some other, even older meaning. But it's good to know. I'm glad we have people in here that know something about astronomy.
Or astrology.
Or astrology, sorry. Or both, I don't know.
Yeah, there you go, both.
I'd like to say just one thing before I depart, please. That I recently rewatched the 2000 Space Odyssey, and because I was told that it contains a lot of symbolism. And in the beginning of the movie, they illustrated what they believed, how darkness became so evil, so to speak, or because, you know, at that time, theoretically, they had the cavemans and the big tigers would come and just have a feast at night. So it was the fear of the darkness that actually brought about the negativity towards the darkness. But, you know, if we look at the yin and the yang, it has to be the two states in order for, like you mentioned earlier, and for us to become enlightened, we have to be endarkened. I like to determine that before we can reach that state of enlightenment, we have to go through a stage of endarkenment, which there is no word in the English dictionary for that, but that's the way I coined it.
The great teacher.
What a great idea.
Pairs of opposites, yes.
You know, also Lucifer is connected to Venus, you know that too, right? The morning star and the evening star, which happen to be the same planet, is connected with that. So another perversion, that's the word. Perversion.
Wait, Venus is connected with what, Maluka?
Lucifer.
Lucifer.
Oh, okay.
That's why
Okay.
they use it in the magazine.
Right.
Springer.
Morning Star. Gotcha.
Yeah, it was morning and evening. They discovered it was the same planet doing both jobs.
But Venus is also, it's wonderful when we can talk about these associations because it helps to get our wheels turning. But Venus is also associated with what else? Manus.
I heard you say that would mean moon, though. Manas would be the moon, wouldn't it?
Well, maybe Jonathan can help me here.
Yeah.
By speaking out of turn.
Yeah.
But yeah, on the occult side of things, I think Venus is supposed to be associated with Manus. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan.
Oh, well, no, I think you can hold your own just fine, Desiree.
Is Venus associated with higher Manus or lower Manus, or is it just Manus in general?
The Kumaras come from Venus. The Kumaras come from Venus. It's supposed to be, that's why they have the enlightening of Manus. It came from them.
Yeah.
Venus.
You know what's interesting? I recently started studying with someone, Vedic astrology, who talks about the moon as Manas, but not only that, he talks about it as Ahamkara.
The moon, I believe, is associated with the astral.
Mm-hmm. It is astral.
Yeah.
So it's not the same thing.
Yeah, it's different principle. Yeah. But
and the brain, they say that our brain, our astral was made in the moon, but as we know, the moon is a dead planet. Dying.
Yeah.
The moon needs defense now and then, in defense of the moon.
In defense of the moon.
Sounds
like a book you're gonna write.
Yeah, because it's such a beautiful reflected light. Yes, there's a lot of necromancy and shenanigans associated with the full moon, but think of the crescent moon, how beautiful it is. And the crescent moon can be a symbol of Buddhi. It can be a symbol of Shiva, the Shiva moon, they say.
Mm-hmm.
And even Buddhi is a reflective of the Atmic light. So even Buddhi is reflective in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a pure transmitter. That's why it can be, the pure voice of the silence. But so in other words, you can, very clearly the moon can be associated with problems, but it can also be something very lovely.
You're right. And also they say that thanks to the moon, the earth can hold that tilt.
Mm-hmm.
The scientists discovered this recently. They're saying that the moon is there because it's helping the earth with the tilt. Otherwise, we will have, a very unbalanced planet. So it has some good things.
You mean we're balanced?
I know.
Well, I think we are kind of a half an hour past our normal time that we end. Thank you, Desiree, so much. Everybody, I think, really concurs. With beautiful and enlightening presentation, and we look forward to your presentation on sound.